Hello guys, this is Big Zot from Alzone. Today I want to make this video about how to deal with the reading passage 3. And we know that it is, most of the time, it's the most challenging task. It has 14 questions, and the text itself is argumentative, meaning it has writers' claims and views, and candidates are mostly tested how they understand the main ideas and whether they could distinguish main ideas from the supporting ideas. So without further ado, let's just get to the task. So my own rule, for me is I need to read the title and I need to read the whole passage before I get started with the questions. And it's just it's not just my own view. This is actually agreed upon by many IELTS experts, including the owner of this website that I get the questions from. So before the questions, they're giving you this reading test strategies, and I completely agree with every single one of them. They're saying in preparing for IELTS, try to read as widely as possible. Read articles or reports on a range of subjects so that you can become more familiar with the type of academic vocabulary that is used. Okay? When doing a reading test, it is very important to read the text carefully pay attention, before you start answering the questions. But don't worry if there are some words that you don't know. Practice trying to guess the meaning of unknown words from the context. Yeah. And decide how much time you'll spend on each section and keep to your plan. Now, this is where I want to just mention that I personally want to set aside 30 minutes for passage 3. So in my opinion, I can deal with the first two passages under half an hour, and then the remaining half an hour is for me to enjoy the passage 3. Of course, I'm not going to spend the whole 30 minutes on passage 3. I'll probably finish it in like under 20 minutes, but I'll have extra 10 minutes to and then go back and check all my answers. So yeah, you do that. You need to stick to your plan so that you don't run out of time. Remember to allow time to check that you have filled in your answers correctly on the answer sheet. So don't copy or don't transfer your answers at the end. You need to do it after each passage. But again, right now we don't want to talk about those basic strategies. Let's just get to work. Uh, so, as I mentioned before, I want to start with the title. Is there more to video games than people realize? This passage is actually from IELTS Trainer, I think test 3 or 4, passage 3. If you want to check that out after the video. Now, is there more to video games than people realize? It just means like, can video games offer more than we realize or than we expect? And when they say offer, they want to say like, are there more benefits? So this is a very natural way to say like, is there more? There is more to video games. It means there are more benefits. All right, so you need to kind of predict the content. As soon as you read the title, you need to think like, all right, so the author probably wants to talk about the benefits of video games. Let's start with the paragraph 1. Many people who spend a lot of time playing video games insist they have helped them in areas like confidence building, presentation skills, and debating. Yet this way of thinking about video games can be found almost nowhere within the mainstream media. We still tend to treat games as an odd mix of slightly menacing and the alien. This lack of awareness has become increasingly inappropriate as video games and the culture that surrounds them have become very big business indeed. Now, in the real test, I would probably read a couple of more paragraphs just to get more insight. But I've already done the questions. I've already highlighted the areas where you can find the answers to the questions. So from the first paragraph, I found one answer to the first question. So, yet this way of thinking about video games can be found almost nowhere within the mainstream media. Mainstream media means like the main, like the current media, the media that surrounds us, the mainstream media, the media that everyone, that is like common, that everyone follows. So this way of thinking, this way, which way? You should always think, like, be careful about these referencing words. This way, what kind of way? All right, to find that, to this, the word this is referring to the idea mentioned in the previous sentence. So many people who spend a lot of time playing video games insist they've helped them in areas like confidence building, presentation skills, and debating. So people who play video games insist that they've improved in these areas like confidence building, presentation, and debating skills. Yet, but this way of thinking, so this way of thinking about video games, this positive way of thinking about video games can be found almost nowhere within the mainstream media. It means the mainstream media isn't talking about it, doesn't mention it anywhere. And they still treat games as an odd mix of slightly menacing. Menacing is a negative word. And the alien. And this lack of awareness, so it means like they don't have this awareness. This lack of awareness has become increasingly inappropriate, like not right, because video games and the culture that surrounds them have become a very big business indeed. Now let's go to the questions right away. We're going to deal with the first question. So this is yes, no, not given questions. Um, all right, I'll just keep the question here. I've already, like I said, I've already done the questions and I've checked my answers. So much media comment ignores the impact that video games can have on many people's lives. Much media comment ignores the impact that the video games can have on many people. So remember, we read about how video games have benefited people in different areas, and then the mainstream media doesn't mention it. They have a lack of awareness. So the answer to this question, based on this paragraph, and specifically this highlighted part of the paragraph, is yes. Remember, yes, no, not given questions are slightly different than true, false, not given questions. They usually appear in passage 3. There's also passage 3. Like, don't worry about the question numbers because they just, they just start with the first question. But in the actual test, this is actually question number 27. And they test your understanding of the writer's opinions and claims as opposed to facts in true, false, not given questions. So the second, we answered the first question. We go to the second paragraph. Recently, the British government released a Byron report into the effects of electronic media on children. Its conclusion set out a clear, rational basis for exploring the regulation of video games. The ensuing debate, the ensuing means the following. Here you need to know some of these keywords for IELTS. So ensuing is very academic, like following debate. So the debate which followed, however, has descended into the same old squabbing between partisan factions. So they descended into, it means like they dived into the same old, meaning, well, again, the debate somehow centered around the negative opinions again. The preachers of mental and moral decline and the innovative game designers. In between are the gamers beasily buying and playing while nonsense is talked over their heads. So basically, there was this, the British government released this Byron report into the effects of electronic media on children. Its conclusion set out a clear, rational basis for exploring the regulation of video games, but somehow the debate afterwards again descended into the same old squabbling between partisan factions. So the question now asks, the publication of the Byron report was followed by a worthwhile discussion between those for and against video games? The answer is no. Because it says, however, the debate has descended into the same old. So instead of like having two sides being debated respectfully, they started preaching. They started again painting video games in negative colors, in, if you can say so. Um, Here I'd like to mention that yes, no, not given questions, just like many question types in the IELTS test, follow the same order in the passage. So the answers you find will be in the same order to the questions that you see. That makes it slightly easier because whenever you have not given questions, instead of like reading around and being lost, you have to read the next question. So if you're not sure about the answer, just move on and try to find the answer to the next question. That way you can know that the previous question the answer was not given, maybe. So anyway, let's read this two questions at the same time. Susan Greenfield's way of writing has become more complex over the years. It is likely that video games will take over the role of certain kinds of books in the future. So I made a mistake. In fact, this was that one single mistake that I made in this passage, and it happens. It's okay. So let's go to this next paragraph, which talks about Susan Greenfield. Susan Greenfield, a renowned neuroscientist, outlines her concerns in a new book. Every individual's mind is the product of a brain that has been personalized by the sum total of their experiences with an increasing quantifier experience, blah, 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 blah. This highlighted part actually answers a different question from a different question type. So let's just ignore it for now. She suggested the fast-paced second-hand experience created by video games and the internet may include inculcate maybe a worldview that is less empathetic, blah 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 blah. There's nothing about her way of writing, right? So we keep reading. Next paragraph also talks about her prose is writing. So Greenfield's prose is full of mixed metaphors and self-contradictions and is perhaps the worst enemy of her attempts to persuade. This is unfortunate because however much technologies may snort, she's articulating widely held fears that have a basis in fact. Unlike even their immediate antecedents, the latest electronic media are at once domestic and work-related, blah, 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 blah. Wait, I see nothing about her way of writing becoming more complicated or complex. Okay, but we need to prove it. First of all, her writing is the way she writes is given here. It's full of mixed metaphors and self-contradictions. But there's nowhere that the author mentions the fact that it has become more complex over the last years. So it must be not given. But how can we be more sure? If you just keep reading, finally you'll reach the next question, where it compares video games to certain kinds of books in the future. So here it says, I guess it's all right. It's right here. We should never forget, for instance, the unique ability of books to engage and expand the human imagination to give us the means of more fully expressing our situations in the world. So again, Greenfield argues that there are ways of thinking that playing video games simply cannot teach, and she has a point. Now let's just keep reading. Intriguingly, the video games industry is now growing in ways, blah, 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 blah. All right, so there's nothing about books. Nothing anymore. So the whole sentence is right here. And I made a mistake here. because I think I should have paid more attention to the word certain. So it's likely that the video games will take over the role of certain kinds of books in the future. But the author says video games simply cannot teach the way books can teach us. And by just reading this sentence, I thought it was contradicting. So I put no as the answer. Because it says it's likely that video games will take over the role of certain kinds of books. There are two possible reasons why I made this mistake. One, as I said, I probably should have paid more attention to the word certain kinds of books. And also in the future. In the future is something key. Okay. So in the future means, well, it's happening in the future. But this sentence doesn't mention anything about the future forecast. It's just making a claim about present. And it's generally comparing books to video games, saying video games cannot teach in the same way as books can. So that was probably my mistake. Anyway, question number 5 and 6. More sociable games are being brought out to satisfy the demands of the buying public. More sociable games are being brought out to satisfy the demands. All right. So, again, we need to keep reading because the questions, as I said, the answers follow the same order. The questions follow the same order as in the passage. Right next there, actually, right after the one sentence that we've actually tried reading, there you can see games in which friends and relations gather round, sociable, right? Round a console, there's a gaming console, to compete at activities are growing in popularity. So these sociable games, or as the question says, yeah, sociable games. Sociable games are becoming more popular. So the agenda is increasingly being set by the concerns of mainstream consumers, what they consider acceptable for their children, what they want to play at parties and across generations, what they want to play at parties. So there's a growing popularity. All right. And then the previous sentence also kind of, hints the answer, basically saying the video games industry is now growing in ways that have more in common with old-fashioned world of companionable pastimes. Companionable, again, another word for sociable pastimes, hobbies, than with a cyber future of lonely, isolated obsessives. So it's becoming more common with sociable games rather than lonely, isolated obsession games. Again, kind of some leading the way to the answer to the question 5. So more sociable games are being brought out to satisfy the demands of buying public. Yes. Being afraid of technological advances is a justifiable reaction. Here the key word is justifiable. Justifiable means there is a good reason behind this reaction. It's rational, okay? The opposite would be irrational or not justifiable. Cannot be justified. Cannot be explained, so to speak. So this highlighted part, let's read the whole paragraph because it's very short. These trends embody a familiar but important truth. Games are human products and lie within our control. This doesn't mean we yet control or understand them fully, but it should remind us that there is nothing inevitable or incomprehensible about them, no matter how deeply it may be felt. Instinctive fear is an inappropriate response to technology of any kind. So the fear, being afraid of technology, is it justifiable? No, it says It's inappropriate response. Inappropriate response is the opposite of justifiable reaction. Hence, the answer is no. So, true, yes, no, not given questions. Well, actually, both the true, false, not given questions and the yes, no, not given questions follow the same order as in the passage. So, make sure when you're doing materials, if you notice there's something wrong with the order, then there must be something wrong with the material itself. So try to avoid such materials. So always work with the standard Cambridge materials. There are a number of books that try to sell so that they make the questions extra difficult, trying to, trick students into buying their materials. Basically thinking, well, if you try with the, if you work with the hardest questions, then the exam questions will appear easier. But when you're working with the wrong set of questions, like the questions that don't really match the standards of the real exam, then you're not really gaining anything. So make sure you work with the materials that are in the same standards of the actual questions. So far, I think this is enough for today. We looked at yes, no, not given questions. If you like the video and if you want me to keep going, I will take a look at other types of questions as well. So, right, thank you for watching.